We're here today with artist Schroeder, and he's going to discuss some of the symbolism that he uses in his work.
What would you like to know?
Well, let's start with the locks and the keys, because they're in pretty much every piece that you do.
Yeah, locks and keys for me represent tools of access. You can either close something up or open it up using a key or a lock, or if you have the right combination, does come from locks too. And everybody I know has got at least one key they've had it for more than a year, and they don't know what it belongs to, but they don't want to give it up. So I'm kind of intrigued by the power of keys. And now people are starting to give me keys, and they've become part of my material. So with my works, which I consider to be open-ended narratives, it takes on a different connotation depending on where the key is placed. One of the great experiences I had was when I was eavesdropping in a gallery. I tend to eavesdrop when I can to just hear what the unfiltered response is from people who are looking at my work. And this one couple was looking at a piece, and the woman was very disturbed by the lock that was in the chest of the figure because the lock was closed. And she would say, well, why is the lock closed? Why does it have to be closed? Why can't it be open? And he very calmly looked at her and said, all you need is the right combination. I thought that was just a great response.
Absolutely.
For that kind of thing. And it's something that I would not have come up with on my own, which is why eavesdropping in a gallery, the artist can get unfiltered responses on pieces.
Had you always used the sign language in your work?
I have not always used sign language. That sign language is something that just started appearing in the work recently as I was reflecting on my own childhood, because when I was in daycare with a deaf boy. His name was Billy. And I remember that we played with Billy. What did he do? Because Billy didn't sign. In fact, his mother didn't want him to sign. I remember overhearing an adult conversation between his mother and my mother. And now that I reflect on it, I realize that his mother did not want him to sign because she wanted him to learn to read lips. That was the big controversy. Do you teach a deaf person to sign or to read lips, or both? And that was an image that just kind of recurred to me. And I realized you can be standing in a room and someone can be hearing impaired. And unless they identify themselves, you won't know that they're hearing impaired or even fully deaf, because they know how to mimic movements so that they don't bring attention to themselves. So I started thinking about sign language and communication and just started using them in works.
Which series did they appear in first?
They first appeared in the Future Voter series.
Okay.
The Future Voter series is inspired by politics. I got tired of listening to the news and just something outrageous kept coming across the news. I needed to do something with that energy. So I started thinking about young people who are experiencing the things that are going through with politics, but maybe now not understanding it at the moment. For example, when they become of voting age, maybe they'll reflect back on the time when mom or dad couldn't stand in line and have something to eat while they were waiting to vote, or why it was illegal for somebody to pass out water while they were waiting to vote. Or here's another crazy story. One of the school districts in Texas was using Winnie the Pooh books to train children to prepare them for mass shootings, because Winnie the Pooh books use words like hide, run, fight, resist, which is the same group of words that the FBI uses to train for mass shootings. So it's that kind of thing that I'm thinking, these kids are not going to really understand what they're experiencing in the moment, but later on they may reflect on it in life. So I call it the Future Voter series.
What was the very first series you did? And did you know when you did the first one it was going to be a series?
The very first series I did was the Angel series, and I did not know it was going to be a series. I read a book by Garcia Marquez about an angel who came to Earth, and it just caused a lot of commotion because people had never experienced an angel. It prompted me to think, what might happen if an angel just appeared on the street today? What would be the response of people? And I started thinking about images of angels, and I don't remember seeing a lot of black male imagery. So I started doing black male angels, and that just grew into a series. I started making them first on canvas because I started off as a painter on canvas. I got to a point where I was abusing the canvas. I was just cutting and burning and shredding it and adding things to it. I realized I needed a stronger foundation. So that's when I went to wood, because that allowed me to shape, but also carve and burn and add other objects to it. So these angels, which were started on canvas, now are being made out of wood. And I'm also inspired by different cultures, particularly cultures that have woodworking: Japanese, Native American, Mexican, African. And I look at how woodworkers handle their works. Those are influences on the pieces that I make now.
When did you start putting the frames on the corners?
The frame started after I had a conversation with a couple of friends of mine in Baltimore who are gallerists. They get these very beautiful, ornate frame corners as samples. They get them all the time and they throw them away. I just happened to be in a gallery once when he was about to put something in the dumpster, and I realized, "And this wonderful piece of craftsmanship needs to be saved from a landfill. Just give it to me and let me see what I can do with it." So playing around with the frames in my studio, they have become part of the work. And initially, I was very delicate about the framing because I thought they were so beautifully made. I was really cautious to cut or to mar them. But now I have so many frame corners, I have no problem with cutting them up and reassembling them and just gluing them together in other configurations.
What's the meaning behind them? Have they grown into a meaning?
One evening, when I was sitting by myself in the studio, I realized that I was looking at a piece. It occurred to me that when you're talking about your life in different periods, the way that you frame your life when you're at different ages is different. The way that you frame your life experiences when you're a child, like say 7 or 8, is different from how you frame your life experiences when you're a teenager, different from 20s to 30s, 40s, 80s, or if you get to be 90. The way that you frame your life at that point is very different from previous periods. So it's always a different frame. But as long as you're alive, as long as you're living, your story is never completely framed, which is why my pieces are never completely framed. They just have different frame corners in different spaces. So that was a metaphorical thing that just kind of evolved. I can't say I deliberately started out doing that.
Now, I know some of the Future Voter series has playing cards in there. What brought them about?
Playing cards is another one of those aha moments. I thought I liked the design on the cards. I came across a deck of cards that had African designs in them. So I started playing around with those. The cards for me now represent, what do you do with the cards you're dealt in life? If you have this set of cards, what do you do with the cards that you have? And depending on the game that you're playing, cards have a different value. For example, if you're playing bid whist, or you're playing hearts, or you're playing fish, cards have a different value in each game. So I like that concept.
So it's the cards represent different values.
They represent different values. They represent choices. If you have a queen, an ace, and a deuce, what are you going to do with that in your hand? Or does that really serve you well?
How about the mirrors? I know they're not in every piece, but they do figure in quite a bit of your work.
I started using mirrors early on, and I was thinking about African works and some Native American works. And I remember some art historians talking about how the mirror can reflect a sense of spirituality in a piece, and it adds a particular dynamic to the work. So I started playing around with that concept of adding something else to the piece as a part of the narrative. The mirror shard can reflect you. The mirror shard can also house different ideas, or it can attract light.
And I noticed you started putting, are those buttons?
Okay.
How did they come about?
I don't remember exactly when they came about. They kind of creeped in, and I believe they came about because I was surrounded by people who were quilters, and they were using a lot of buttons and a lot of other things, and I liked the effect of the buttons on those textiles. Also, looking at some African works I saw from South Africa, I believe, I saw a series of buttons that were used on a wooden sculpture, and I realized that adds a different type of rhythm or dynamic to the surface. And that's when I started playing around with the buttons. But now I'm thinking, in some of the pieces and in some of my open-ended narratives, buttons represent fasteners. So what is it that you're fastening to? What is it that you're holding on to? What is it you're closing up? So I'll think about that. But visually, because although I'm a figurative painter primarily, I still work abstractly. I still paint like an abstract painter. So I'll use something like buttons or mirror shards or even other objects to create a rhythm in the piece. So when you're looking at the work, your eye is directed in different areas and different places with a different rhythm.
The wire that projects from some of them? What is that? Does it have a meaning, and how did that come about?
It started off as an experiment because I was working on a piece and I thought it needed something to it, and I thought this needs an aura.
Okay, that's fair enough.
This piece needs an aura. So that's how it began. And now, like, a lot of pieces just have auras, or they have an energy. And when I look at the composition, the wire might add, the way it directs your eye, the piece may end here, but the wire extends it, so it takes it out into a space. So the piece doesn't end here. It continues out into a space. I was also looking at some Italian paintings from 17th century, and the way that the painters use rays, just rays of light coming out of very spiritual figures in those paintings. I was inspired by that.
What do you want people to know about you as an artist?
I don't know that I want them to know much about me at all. That doesn't matter so much. I'd really like them to get something from the work. And that doesn't mean I want them to like the work. I want them to engage with the work. Sometimes the deepest conversations I have with people are when I ask them, which piece in this gallery disturbs you? And let's talk about it. And when we talk about the things that disturb them, we can have a really rich conversation. And again, I'm not trying to get them to like the work. I just want them to engage with the work.
Well, and I think with all the elements in your work, for those of us that love art, it automatically becomes engaging, because we're trying to say, all right, why is that over here and why is that there?
Yeah, and that's what I find fascinating. When you're engaged with something, it's not just an either or, like or dislike. Sometimes you're disturbed by something and you don't really know why it disturbs you. Like, there's some people who are disturbed by the frame corners. It just drives them bonkers. But I realized that the way that they approach life, things need to be neatly framed and complete.
Also, the fact that they're uneven and they're all different and everything.
It drives some people absolutely nuts.
See, to me, that's part of my personal attraction to your work, is it's not all, perfectly rectangular or square.
Yes,
and it also, because of the elements you put in it, it forces my eye to move around.
Yes, good. That's what I'm after. And I'm inspired by writers as well. And I appreciate writers who, use language very well. I also appreciate writers who force me to read a paragraph more than once, because I know that they spend a lot of time crafting those words in that paragraph. And I enjoy rich writing. I would like the viewer to have the same experience with my work. I don't want my work to be a 3-second look. I want them to actually be stopped and to be forced to look at it. I appreciate when people say, I've had one of your pieces for years now, and every time I look at it, I see something different. That is inspiring. That's inspiration.
Yeah, I think that happens here too. When at the church show, when I was talking about your pieces, the reaction I got was, one lady said that she had walked past it because she was one of the people that helped hang the show. Mm-hmm. And she said, the third time she walked past it, it was like, wait a minute, I didn't see that before. Which I thought was just a great reaction.
Yeah, that's the kind of response I really enjoy.
And it's going to take me a while to get into these new pieces that you brought up to see what all those little elements and signs and squiggles are.
Yeah, the latest series are a continuation of the angels, but now the angels have moved from angel clocks. They're now angel sconces. So I'm collecting sconces where I can find them and then reconfiguring them. Also, the series I'm working on is inspired by my trip to Brazil. Last year I was in Bahia in Brazil, and I'm still working on that imagery. A lot of light, a lot of bright color, the architecture, both the modern structures that struck me. They have a lot in the cities. They have a lot of tall, narrow, white structures that just kind of struck me visually, and the architecture hit me visually. And many times they can be juxtaposed to some very old pieces of architecture that are run down, but visually they're beautiful. They're run down and decrepit, basically, but they're really beautiful in terms of the texture and their color. So I'm playing with those juxtapositions.
It's interesting because the way you have this one in particular painted, especially like the top right part, it almost feels feathery. for, the reaction I have to it.
Feathery?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good. Good. Yeah, that piece was taken when I was taking some shots of some kids who were playing ball in a park, in a garden, really lush garden. And in the background, you could see the water and then you could see the skyscrapers. So I was trying to capture all of that.
So what else do you want people to know? You got some money in these. Also, some of your pieces have tickets in it.
Yeah.
Usually ones that say admit one. Mm-hmm. So is there special significance to that?
Again, that's part of the narrative. And I would say in some pieces, admit one might speak to the notion of access when you're trying to achieve something. And perhaps what you're trying to achieve on the other side, they will only admit one. The question is, are you going to be that one that they admit? It can be that. It can also be something else. It could also be a notation of confidence where a person says they're only going to take one and that one's going to be me. So again, it's open-ended, and I like people to respond to it.
Your barbershop series, especially among my male clientele, you just see that look and that feel of, oh, yes, that was my youth. That is, my Saturday afternoon kind of thing. Is that what inspired you?
No. I can say no, because I did not grow up having barber experiences. My family cut my hair. So that series was drawn out by my experience with a guy in the gym. I was in the gym shaving my head, and this really tall brother came back behind me and said, "What do you know about cutting hair?" And I said, well, I shave my head every other day. Like, who are you? Turns out he was a barber. And I'd been thinking about doing some barber scenes, but I had never had the opportunity. So I said, well, can I come to your shop and make some notations and do some images? And he let me come in and take some pictures. So that was the beginning of the barbershop series. He let me come in and take some shots. He let me come and do some sketches. And I would do a portrait of the guy sitting in the chair, and I would give them the portrait. But I would keep the information from the portrait so I could use it later on as a reference. And that's how that series began. And I realized at one point, all of my images were from this one shop. So I needed to kind of branch out, because as I spent more time in the shop, I was becoming more attuned to the cultures. And I realized that each barbershop has its own personality, but they have some things that are common. You're going to have the chair where the sitter sits. You're going to have some chairs where the people who are waiting to have their hair cut are sitting. You're going to have mirrors, and you're going to have a whole shelf full of grooming materials. Beyond that, it can be anything. It could be a high-end barbershop where they serve you bourbon. It can be another kind of shop where there's a pool table in the back while guys are playing pool waiting to get their haircut. It can be a different kind of shop where the barber has a relationship with teenage boys in the neighborhood, and while they're waiting to get their haircut, they're having really serious conversations about growing up in adolescence. So I appreciated the different environments, and I was trying to capture that in the barbershop series. Sometimes people ask me, well, how many pieces are you going to do in the series? I never set out with a set number, because I don't know. I just wait until the series kind of peters out and I go into the next thing. The barbershop has about 75 pieces in that series. I would never have sat down and said, I'm going to sit down and do 75 barbershop pieces. I just didn't have that concept. So,
do you have another series in mind that's coming up next?
I'm still involved with the Future Voters and the Brazil series at the moment. So I'm still trying to see where that takes me. Yeah, still working with those.
I love the Future Voters, because here personally, I get to teach history with them, especially the jelly bean one. Because most people do not know that was a test for voting.
Yes.
So before that one I guess is in California. Before that one left here, there was a lot of history taught around it. And I appreciate that in your work.
Thank you. Every once in a while I get a good tidbit, and I think I want to capture this notion. So with that particular piece, it was the idea of grown adult people being told that they needed to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order for them to be able to vote. I wanted to just capture that. There's a piece recently that's the literacy test, and there were different ways that in the South, particularly in Georgia and I think in Texas, where they put up insane tests for a person to be able to read before they were allowed to vote. And they weren't meant to read it. In fact, the person who was giving them the test couldn't read those words.
Right.
So,
And I was going to say that, it was a deliberate thing to keep Black men from voting.
absolutely, yeah.
Since women still weren't allowed to vote.
Women were not
then.
allowed to vote at that time. That's right. But even after women were allowed to vote, some places they still had the literacy tests, which a lot of people are not aware of. So I have a picture of a young boy with a basketball. He's kind of he's holding the basketball, and I have some information about the literacy tests on this side. And then there's some figures that represent rulers and measurement on the other side. So talking about literacy.
And we hadn't talked about the rulers that are in some of your work.
The rulers, for me, represent measurement. And I think we're all either measuring ourselves about something or being measured by somebody for something. Sometimes it's destructive. Sometimes it can be constructive. But there's that notion of measuring. Am I good enough? Have I reached my goals? Am I ever going to reach these goals? Are these goals realistic? What's going on with the measurement?
So, all right. So what else do you want people to know about you or your work?
About me, I would like them to know that I'm an artist who experiments with different media, who is serious about trying to put across a certain idea in my creative process. I'm also a puppeteer, so
Have you ever just painted what you considered a pretty picture that didn't have symbolism?
I think that comes in maybe like in the angel wings, because whenever I do an angel wings, for me that's pure abstraction. I'm not trying to do anything recognizable inside these areas, but I eventually end up doing something that is connected with a figure or a head or a body. That kind of thing. It eventually has got a body connected to it. But in the process, I'm working purely abstractly. I listen to a lot of music.
Could you ever do a pure abstract painting?
I have. I could. And
Were you happy with it?
after I did it, it was actually a commission. And after I did it, I realized that it looked like an orgy. It wasn't my intention, but that's what it turned out looking like.
So it was abstract but figurative?
And that's what the guy was after, actually. But I realized, this happened.
I won't even ask what your inspiration was.
This happened. Yeah.
So was that a recent piece?
No, this is in college. Yeah, this is in college.
And where'd you go to college?
Undergrad, I went to University of Michigan. That was for fine art and painting and puppetry. For my master's degree, I went to George Washington University, and I have a doctorate in museum education from Columbia University in New York.
So you always knew you wanted to do puppetry too?
Yes, there are three things that are consistent throughout my life. Puppetry, because I did puppets as a kid, picked it back up when I was in college. Museum work, and visual arts. So those three things were...
What's your job in museum work?
Currently, I am the curator at Morgan State University at the James E. Lewis Museum of Art. But I've been in museums for over 45 years now, and I've had different positions. They've all had to do with some part of education and administration. I've also been a grant maker. I was deputy director for museums for the U.S. With the Institute of Museum and Library Services as a grant maker. Also a grant maker in New York with the Lila Wallace Funds. But throughout my career, it's been connected somehow with the arts and with museums and puppetry.
So strictly working with art museums?
No, actually, no. When I was at the Institute of Museum and Library Services, museums across the board. So historic sites, zoos, botanical gardens, aquariums, history houses, children's museums. It was across the board. But they were all museums, yes.
Nice. So since we're talking about museums, what do you think museums should be doing to diversify?
What should they be doing to diversify? I think they should be looking at their immediate populations and seeing where diversification makes sense, and find somebody they connect with on their boards and put them into strategic places to guide them to make strategic decisions.
Do you think most major museums do reflect the populace that walks through the doors?
Okay, you got 22,000 museums in the country, so...
Okay, well, I'm talking about like the major art museums especially.
That's a case by case basis, and it really boils down to who's in leadership position.
Well, yeah, that
It
changes
is
the EMA.
it is a case by case scenario.
Were you happy with the changes at the BMA?
I wasn't at the BMA when they started making changes. I was actually brought onto the BMA. That's what brought me to the East Coast from California. I think they are addressing contemporary issues. What people need to remember about the Baltimore Museum of Art, though, it was never intended to be a regional museum. That's part of the conversation that's happening. When the Baltimore Museum of Art was established by the Cohen sisters, it was meant to be an international place. It was never meant to be just for Baltimore or Maryland artists. And I think that's part of the conversation that contemporary artists don't quite understand.
It's interesting because I've had some of the Smithsonian people in here, and I question National Gallery people, and I question why the Smithsonian American Art Museum has a much larger collection of African American art than the National Gallery does. And she said that a lot of pieces at the National Gallery have been donated, and that people just don't donate African American art. But I also know they don't buy African American art as much as they should. And I think that's a subject, I mean, it needs to be addressed.
Yes.
We were talking recently, well, no, we were just talking about how, they'll do purchase grants. They'll find a way to get their supporters to buy a piece. And if it happens to be a piece, it can be $1 million piece by a European artist. They'll come up with the money. But try to get them to come $10,000 for a piece by a living African-American artist, and it doesn't happen.
That all boils down to connections. It all boils down to connections and knowledge. Who knows who and who's got access to the funding.
Okay, so maybe I need to explore that more too. So if you have advice for young artists, what's the best piece of advice you can give a young artist?
A young artist, I would say expose yourself to as much art as possible. Allow yourself to play with whatever media or style that you're doing. Don't let somebody else determine what your limitations are, and keep producing.
That sounds good, and I think that's a great place to stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you.